Hola, soy Jorge Ramos.
And I'm Paula Ramos.
And this is The Moment, El Momento. You want to talk about El Sueño Americano?
Yes. So I feel like the American dream as a concept is something that you and I talk a lot about. It's part of our reporting, it's part of our story, but I feel like this idea, the American dream, is very romanticized. We spend so much time talking about what the dream looks like, talking about what migration north looks like, talking about the economic opportunities, talking about, which you tell me all the time, like how lucky we are to be in this country.
It sort of worked for me.
It worked for you, but I think today for me is really about talking about the darker side of that American dream, what the cost is. But before we get there, I do want to talk about the first time you came to this country. Like, do you remember what that felt like?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it was in 1983. I remember the moment in which I arrived in Los Angeles. But the fact, talking about the painful thing, is I just didn't want to be an immigrant. I was forced to be an immigrant. So something pushed me out of Mexico and something brought me in here in the United States. But now that you ask me, I can tell you that I did well 40 years later. But it was very painful. I was so alone. It was...
Which you never talk about.
No, porque de eso no se habla. No? I was so completely alone. And not only that, I couldn't even ask for help. I had no money. And back then, nobody was talking about mental health. So I think at the end I did well, but I sort of closed myself to the world and said, okay, I just gotta move on, and that's it. But it was never easy.
That's interesting, right? Because I think when people think about you, including myself, you think of sort of the Jorge Ramos that made the American dream. We see you on TV, we see you here. We never hear about the loneliness and the hard part. And I feel like I've spent a lot of time, yes, covering sort of the positive aspects of immigration, as you have, but I spent so much time covering so many stories of immigrants that have felt a lot of pain trying to achieve that dream.
¿Qué te dicen?
My mind takes me to one of the first stories I did was in the Central Valley in California. And something that I'll never forget ever was spending time with a migrant farm worker that used meth in order to work because he was so tired, está súper cansado. And so he kind of grew into this addiction because he had to work, not because he needed the money. I'll take you to then Milwaukee, and I'll never forget there. This is during the first Trump administration. And I remember spending time with a family. One of the girls, she's 16 years old, and she was suicidal because the thought of her father being deported and the PTSD that she felt every time she heard la ambulancia or a police car, like that drove her into deep, deep depression. So I think the question that we'll explore today is a very hard one, which is how do you cope with the pain?
And the link between mental health and the American dream.
Well, I think that's the thing, How do you cope? Some people cope with drugs. Some people cope with alcohol. Some people cope through complete loneliness. But I think the North Star is if you're able to choose healing and recovery and talk about mental health, talk about your loneliness, talk about these things.
We never talk about that. Mental health issues.
Whose fault is that?
Empezando por mí.
Who's the adult now,
Who's the dad? That's why we're talking now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's continue talking about the American dream.
Okay.
It's not easy, no? Well, that's why we're doing this show, no?
Right. Well, yeah.
Okay. Our guest, Jessica Hoppe, is going to help us answer those questions.
Jessica is a Honduran, Ecuadorian American author and activist who is redefining how we think about addiction, a topic that is at times hard for some Latino families to talk about. But she's also redefining the way that we think about the American dream.
In Jessica's memoir titled First in the Family, A Story of Survival, Recovery, and the American Dream, she challenges the idea that addiction is a personal failure, arguing instead that it's a systemic story.
So today, on The Moment, how do we cope? Welcome to the moment, Jessica.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This is iconic.
Oh, thank you so much.
Truly.
No, I think, look, for us, it's important to have this conversation because we are talking about something that we barely talk about, no? Breaking down stigmas, stereotypes, and just humanizing, I think, a lot of these issues that have been criminalized and that we just shy away from. Right. And that's where I want to start.
Right.
How do you define what it means to be an addict?
Mm-hmm. The clinical definition, or the one that most people in the field agree with, is a cycle of behavior you feel powerless to stop despite negative consequences. So I am hard-pressed to find someone who cannot relate to that kind of behavior. Mm-hmm. And so this, for me, happens to be drugs. It can be anything. It can be your phone, sex, shopping, power, money. It's actually pretty straightforward. And it's extremely common, and it's a very human behavior. It's a response to pain. So whether you respond to that pain that you're in chemically or behaviorally, all human beings experience it. And it's not something we should be ashamed of. We've just stored it in a way where we have some things that are acceptable and we have others that are unacceptable.
Right, so it's still a completely stigmatized word.
Absolutely, particularly when it relates to drugs.
You are someone that unapologetically identifies themselves as an addict. Mm-hmm. If you're hearing this for the first time, people would be like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. When was the moment when you took ownership of that identity? You said, yes, I am an addict.
Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation with my mother. I was a few months, I was like weeks in to my sobriety. And the way I actually came to terms with it was through an accident. I had a very bad night, and I was going through a lot. I had begun blacking out pretty quickly, and I was losing hours, evenings, days, half days of my life without any recollection of what was happening. One night, I was in a very dangerous position trying to cross the West Side Highway, and a woman saved my life. She was in touch with me weeks later, and she asked me a very important question. I had nights like this before, and my parents were not aware. My sister was aware. And she would ask me questions. In fact, we got in a pretty serious fight about my behavior. But our understanding of alcoholism, substance use disorder was something that is a choice, something that is a reflection of bad behavior, it's a selfishness, and it's a moral failure. And so I had internalized that deeply from everything that I've observed, everything that I've absorbed culturally, politically, and so I felt very ashamed of myself. The way this woman, I suppose from her perspective as a stranger, was to ask me if I knew what was happening to me. And it just completely reframed everything.
Was that the first time anyone had asked you that
Absolutely.
question?
You know what people were asking me was like, do you know what you did last night? Or like, do you remember what you said?
Making
like, how could you
bad.
do that? Yeah, how'd you even get home? It was very shameful.
What happened actually? How did she save you?
Well, I was so if you know the West Side Highway, it's like a multiple lane highway. And there was some construction in front of the Whitney Museum that was under renovation at that time. And so there were a few barriers to entry like off the highway. And I was on the other side. And so as she saw me kind of spill out of a taxi and sort of stumble in these very high heels, I kept running into the cement barriers. And she says at one point I tried to sort of climb up on it and tiptoe across like a balance beam, and that I was going to fall, and now comes oncoming traffic. So she got up from the stairs of the Whitney, and she sort of grabbed me because I wasn't finding my way across. I kept running into the barrier, and then it had a fence above it. And so she guided me to safety, and she tried to get me a taxi, and I don't really remember any of that. I woke up in my bed, half-dressed.
You don't remember anything?
With all of my possessions, save my phone. So anything could have happened to me. I trembled to think what happened to me that night, but I am here. I took that story to my therapist, and I said, I'm going to read you these messages that I received, this conversation that I had. I'm not going to interject. I'm not going to offer anything. I'm not going to make any excuses. At the end of this, I just want you to tell me, like, is it true? And she said, yes. She said, The idea is, or sort of the test, the barometer is your life unmanageable? And she said, I think near death is unmanageable.
Near death.
Near death is unmanageable. So I was so frightened by this reality, but I could feel with like all certainty that this was true and this is what I must do. How I was going to explain that to my family was the first barrier for me. Like the first people I saw in my mind's eye were my mom and dad. They're just like, how am I going to tell them I'm this thing?
You didn't want to tell them?
No.
Because you felt shame?
Yes, I was so afraid. You know, there are people in my family and people who have suffered, and they're very bad actors. You know, they'd cause quite a bit of harm in our family, especially directly to my mother. My uncle was deported for his, the symptoms of disorder. Another died, and when her father died was when we had the conversation. And when her father died is when I understood how important it would be for me to really take on and step into this world so that we could have a conversation and interrogate it, break it down, and sort of take the charge out of it by getting to the root of the story. Because it wasn't what I was going through that she felt fearful of or that she judged. It was the story that we'd all internalized. And then the idea of putting me shoulder to shoulder with the people who had been most harmful in her life, being her father, her brothers, era que no encajaba, she just could not make sense of that.
So the hardest thing was just to have a conversation with your own family.
Yes, I told them the story of that night. They were devastated. They were the only people in the world that I told, because I wasn't prepared to tell anyone either. And luckily I went into a program that is based on anonymity. So I got a reprieve for a while. And soon after my grandfather died, we got the word from Honduras that he had passed. And that was the first time my mother spoke to me about his alcoholism and that the reason for his death was alcohol related. And I said to her, Mommy, how does it feel to have had a father who's an alcoholic and now you have a daughter who's an alcoholic? And she was like, no digas eso, like, don't talk about yourself like that. Like, I don't see you that way,
So
my
it was
father,
not a family problem.
She was just like, her perception, her idea was, mi papá siempre trabajó, siempre bien vestida como usted, always working, always well-dressed, no estaba, caído en la calle like my uncle, even though she was the only person who would look after her uncle that was on the street and get him home and get him dressed and get him food. She didn't want me to be. She couldn't put me shoulder to shoulder with that. And I just took that opportunity, as hard as it was, because normally I'd be like, you're right, I'm not that, But I was like, this is too important. This is going to break through something for us as a family. And I think it's a conversation that other families need to have. So I just said, I am, Mommy. I'm an alcoholic.
You were doing something harder. No, it's not. It's not just talking to your family that is very hard.
Right.
You were getting to the root of that addiction.
Yes.
And in many ways that required you to understand your full family history. And so in doing that, what did you learn about your family history that then sort of helped you clarify your own journey?
My memories of my grandfather are so few because he was estranged from my mother, therefore from us. But the story of him was so large, because my relationship with my mother is so close, and she suffered so much as a result of that estrangement and the abuse. And so I really resented my grandparents for their role in what I felt ailed my mother. And so the only perspective that mattered to me was my mother's. I believe her 100%, and I do. I just think that in our families, and, I'll speak for myself, but I think it's something that I find a lot of Latino families struggle with, is that we are very much unwilling to step into the dark parts of our humanity, because we're so often not allowed to narrate, or we're not even entitled to the full spectrum of our humanity.
Explain that more.
Meaning, the story of us, like you from 2016 to now, right, is like we're criminals. We're rapists. We're drug addicts. We're derelicts. We're sending warships off the coast of Venezuela. We have disappeared thousands and thousands of people. I won't say we, the government, the federal government, the administration, on the basis of a story about who we are as a people. The response to that has, for so long as I can remember, would be to correct that narrative by offering our exceptions, our good deeds, how much we contribute to the GDP, how hard we work, all the fruit we pick, and all our supposed good deeds, all of our hard work and labor, and that should mean something to people who dehumanize us. I was part of that for so long. That's what First in the Family is all about.
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
So at what point is your responsibility? And at what point is history's responsibility?
I feel that it's my responsibility, and this has been the gift of sobriety for me, of recovery for me, was to interrogate the stories that I've internalized that are untrue, which is that if I suffer from symptoms that are a direct response to the system that I've been forced to live in, which is dehumanizing to me, and I respond as a human being, that I should be discarded and I should be considered a disposable person because I am not operating in a way that the system deems valuable or that they can take a transaction from.
Some people might think that's an excuse.
That's a very common response. Yeah, of course.
They say, don't blame the system, it's you.
Don't blame the system. That's hilarious. What I say to that is that understanding the system properly helps me bring context to my life and myself so that I can be freed from the narratives in my mind that limit me from being my full self, right? So if I were to believe that it was okay for my uncle to be discarded, for my grandfather to, be discarded and die painfully, for my cousin to die in a hospital bed with his last breaths being about how he needs to get up and get back to work because he felt so ashamed on his deathbed, dying of cirrhosis at 39 years old, that he be laid out, that he need rest, that he need to pass from this world peacefully because he's ashamed that it's his fault that he's there in that bed because he drank too much to deal with the pain of being in this world, which is unfair to so many of us. I have never experienced a truer indictment of this system, the power, the trauma that it inflicts on people who have to toil just to be considered human beings. I do not fault any of us for succumbing to those symptoms. And when I was able to understand that about myself, I was able to understand it about my family, about my grandfather.
The whole history. And the whole history.
Yes, and so the specifics of that history were so liberating because drugs and alcohol have been used throughout history to enable this forced labor, this exploitation of labor, particularly in Honduras. So what I did was go on a journey with my grandfather. Yes, my family's from Honduras, from La Ceiba. And many of us know the story of, the United Fruit Company. And my grandfather worked there. He was sort of recruited. There was a time, that was the decade of dictatorships in Honduras. And he grew up under very oppressive circumstances. And so when U.S. businessmen who were manipulating the government, right, like stamping down any kind of peasant or workers' rights, and putting in their puppet, leadership, just like they do now, just like we're about to see in Venezuela, just like we've seen in Honduras, bad things happen in a place that's being exploited and decimated in that way. And drugs are normally a part of that. The interesting story about those, the interesting thing about those stories is that those drugs are always traveling north. Mm-hmm. But the bad actors are always south somehow. And
that's the key of your book, no? That you are literally attempting to trace back this addiction. Mm-hmm. you trace it back to these systems, to immigration, to colonization, to political trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do people get it when when you talk to them? Are they?
the beginning,
Because
I'm sure.
No, it's been a year, and I'd say
no, and that's why I think it is such a it is a hard thing to grasp. It's a very profound one.
Yeah.
And I
thank
think
you.
it is. And so if you're trying to draw a simple map for someone that says, Jessica, help me understand that direct lineage, between Latin American colonization.
And
This history that so many Latinos carry with them into the United States. What does that picture look like?
Okay. For me, it sort of starts. So I was about 6, 7 when George Sr. was president, right? I remember sitting on the floor. Bush. Yes.
You remember him?
I remember.
Talk to
Of course you do. I remember sitting on the floor of our living room. There was the first national address by Bush, and he was going to give an imperative, important address to talk about the biggest threat to our national security. And on that day, it was drogas. And the drogas were coming from the Andean region. The Andean region is a part of where my father is from,
The
in
drogas
Ecuador.
were killing us.
And the drogas were killing us. And the drogas were connected to violence. That's the most important thing, to always correlate drugs and violence, drugs and depravity, and then again correlate that to minoritized people. So when I heard Trump come down, that staircase, that escalator in 2016, and he kicked off his race by saying, all Mexicans are rapists. And
Criminals and rapists.
Yes. I was like, it was a dog whistle. I literally went back to that.
Because I'm a Mexican immigrant and we're not criminals and we're not rapists.
The actual numbers on criminality amongst immigrants is laughable. So the fact that this story persists and that polls continuously find that most people believe this, you always can find drugs at the forefront, at the front line of creating that narrative. So as a writer, I focus on those narratives so that we can understand the truth. And I think that if you can understand that in yourself, in your family, then you can make sense of it, for your community. So I focus on Latino families because, especially now, we are, public enemy number 1.
Yeah.
And I connect it to other movements, the indigenous movements, the Black liberation movement, which have always talked about addiction and drugs as a tool of oppression, as a tool of enslavement, and sobriety more as a recovery of self, of pride to self. There is an indigenous study of it as a soul wound, right? The Black liberation movement, even Frederick Douglass spoke about it during the temperance movement and during the time of abolition. So this is just there have always been this otherizing and criminalizing and stigmatizing of other in order to oppress and maintain control. There have always been the response, a movement of understanding, hey, this is by design. And the first way that we understand how to, deconstruct or liberate ourselves from the system is to understand that A, it's false, that it's not our fault, and that we're entitled to the full spectrum of our humanity. That could mean not using drugs.
I was just going to say, that leads me to then one of the things that always sticks with me when I think of you, which is that at the end, the underlying drug is the American dream.
Yes.
That the underlying, perhaps most powerful drug is this idea that the American dream, as you've put it, is the ultimate gateway.
Actually, you said, Jessica, American dream is the ultimate gateway drug.
I did. I know people don't like that one either.
Well, no. It's just complicated. It's complicated because
Profound.
Thank you.
Well, I think I lived the American dream. I mean, I came as an immigrant with nothing, and then my life changed, and yours too.
But look, I think we are staring at a current socio-political environment where people are questioning, what is the cost of the American dream? Can it cost your life? Does it cost your mental health?
My question is it a myth? Is it true? Can you have your own definition? Can you understand what that dream is for yourself?
'Cause you were following the American dream.
Absolutely.
You got into fashion. You wanted to be successful, rich.
Yes. Oh my God, with all my might, con todo mi esfuerzo, I was like, I want to do it.
So is that almost killed you?
Yes. So my point is like, when I was that little girl sitting on the floor and I heard, the whole picture of this criminal drug user, drug trafficking, breaking into houses, raping women, stealing children, right? The whole caricature came to life. I understood in that moment that I was being related to this and people in my family were being identified this way, no matter what we were, no matter who you are, no matter what good that you did, Jorge, you know what I mean? So I was part of that. I was going to be placed in that bucket, no matter what. What I could do, which is what America, an American dream, and American exceptionalism tells you, is that through your works, through your acts, you can separate yourself from those stereotypes, from that experience. You can protect yourself, right? What we experience moving into these rooms, which you've experienced, which we all watched on TV, how Trump spoke to, right?
Yeah.
Is that
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. So the question
You're
for
always
us,
the outsider, the stranger. Yeah.
always,
You're not
no
gonna be part
matter
of-
what.
Let me ask you about the Latino community and the American dream. If you see the numbers, how we're growing,
Yes.
are we getting better salaries, better homes, better education? Are we doing better, or are we sacrificing something in the process?
I think that when we respond to systemic, powerful, targeted attack like we are right now, there is public opinion comes out and it immediately says, if we get rid of all these immigrants, who's going to pick our fruit? Do you think that sounds like the understanding of who we are as human beings? Exactly. So we have a capitalist system, and I understand the inclination to want that to amount to something because that's the story we were told about how we will amount to something. We created the category of Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx to coalesce political power, right? To have a group together who could united say, hey, we need funds for this. We need funds for our school. We need funds for healthcare. And that we could, push against our politicians. We cannot, not in any kind of meaningful way. Look at this attack. I mean, this present moment could not more painfully display the myth of American exceptionalism and the American dream for people who are stereotyped and otherized.
It doesn't matter how much you tried, you're still not being accepted.
I don't think it's like I'm not being accepted. I don't want to feel sorry for myself or oh, I'm not being accepted. I'm just, as we've talked about here, I think it's an idea that is difficult to metabolize and understand. But I think that just like in my life experience, when we go to something that has been stigmatized so far, so we're going to the outer reaches of the spectrum, right? Yeah. So if our community has started to talk about mental health issues beyond ay, el diablo, que tiene el diablo adentro, whatever we say.
En México era, te estás volviendo loco.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
And then you were not looking for help.
No.
Because
you were just that person's crazy. Get out of here. That person hurt this person. Yes. Yeah. When I arrived at my cousin's deathbed, I said, lo siento, tío. And he said, ay, no hay que tener pena. Esa es la vida. He said, that was a cycle.
Even then.
A cycle of life, he said to me. There is nothing natural about a 39-year-old young, beautiful man dying of cirrhosis the way my cousin did. That death was absolutely 100%, a million times preventable. It wasn't because of these awful stereotypes, because of these terrible stories, and the way we are forced as immigrants and immigrant families to hide those aspects of ourselves and only present our labor, our intelligence, our works, the money that we spend in this economy, which we are not entitled to. And so I just, of course, I have the respect for my family, and we're all going to process this differently. But the way that we continue to misunderstand and not offer ourselves, not say, I won't abandon you. You know, one of the hardest things about this moment was to see it coming from so far away, which you both must have experienced, and to hear so many immigrant families, people who you can identify with. You know, the whole Latino identity is very fraught. We know this, but like to hear people say, like, ay, solo van a llevar los criminales. They're just going to take criminals, so it's fine.
The images that we're seeing nowadays, I mean, those raids, for instance, I'm seeing families separated. I'm seeing the children. I just remember one in which there was a boy, maybe 10 years old, and then the reporter asked, what happened? And he said, se llevaron a mi mamá. No?
I know.
So just imagine the mental health issue that we're dealing with in the community.
Can you imagine what will happen to that child?
And many others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to that child? What is she going to understand about her safety in this place?
And
She's
many others.
never going to feel. I mean, so many others.
Yeah, just imagine going to school and thinking that maybe they're going to take away your parents.
Yes, they're going to come home to no parents, or they're going to start going into schools. They have no problem taking children. We saw children zip-tied. I watched a man just walk, a man that looked exactly the way my father looked every day of his life when he went to work. A neon t-shirt, green khaki pants, work gear, and all of a sudden they just took him and he said, déjame llamar mi mujer, déjame llamar mi mujer. He's like, Juan, llama mi mujer, está embarazada. And like, I was just like, he's never coming home. So I am so afraid for what is happening to us psychically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. Obviously, the most concern goes to the people who have been abducted, who are now in concentration camps, who are like the immediate collateral of the system. I think that the way we help people understand that is not a distant thing is to help people understand that your exceptionalism and the belief that it cannot come for you, that you've done the right thing, that it's okay. Now everyone's like, yo no soy criminal. And they just took her for no reason. And this and that. I hope people understand that in immigration law, or under these standards, which are lawless, by the way, and completely unconstitutional, being a, quote, criminal is driving without a license, a DUI. We're seeing so many people. I saw a family. It was like militarized police outside a small home of 4 people, drones, SWAT, machine guns, smashing everything to collect a man who was completely willing and compliant because he got a DUI in like the 80s. Do you know what I mean? Like, how many celebrities do you know have DUIs who've actually committed vehicular homicide? How many politicians do you know?
And most immigrants arrested have no criminal record.
No criminal record, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a moot point, which proves that it's a story. It proves that it's a story that collects our public support so that we're complicit.
So I'm connecting everything that you're saying from the beginning.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm so glad.
Julio, I do want to go back to your story. Just give us a sense of how many people in your family were and are addicts.
That I know of.
Yeah.
That would admit it.
Yeah.
None would admit it except me, which is why I say that I'm not the first person in my family to suffer from this. I'm not the first person to even attempt recovery. I learned that one of my uncles attempted. He tried AA in Honduras because his wife told him it's that or that te dejo. And when he got to the U.S., he relapsed. He relapsed with working in a kitchen at a hotel with my grandfather because it was just like the only thing, the only way to relate, the only way to speak, the only way to connect.
And that's why I asked, because what you did is that to get out of that, you liberated yourself mentally,
Yes.
but also physically. So
Yes.
what was the sort of healing and recovery process like?
I went into AA in Tribeca because I was in a bad way. I was ending a relationship with someone who was an addict as well, which in many ways helped me to understand what was happening to myself. I was staying with another ex in like the attic of his loft. It was a terrible, very sad time in my life. And the nearest meeting was in Tribeca in a very white, affluent part of town at this very sterile, sober living house. And those people became my family. I had the whole miraculous experience, which was that you hear a person tell your story, a stranger tell your story, and you relate not in the particulars of the story, but in the feeling and the cycle of behavior, the cycle of thinking. And so I stayed. I loved it. I was like, oh my God. But what really stood out to me was like the way these people talk about substance use disorder has nothing to do with the way my family talks about it or understands it. Like, why are we always like kept so far from the reality of this? Not even like the clinical, the therapeutic, which we know we're not entitled to at all. But just the facts, the simple facts. That's why I always say I'm not interested in getting my parents' sympathy or acceptance. I believe that when they become acquainted with the facts, they will understand for themselves, which they have.
What are the false narratives that shape recovery and
That
healing?
this is a moral failure.
It's your fault.
That it's your fault.
Que eres mala.
Sí, que soy egoísta. That I just want to like cause trouble. That soy sinvergüenza. Like I heard that word all the time in my home about
No seas sinvergüenza.
no seas sinvergüenza, o esa tan sinvergüenza. It was like the thing. And now it's like the thing I most want to be because shame has so crippled me. Like it's hurt me in so many ways. Like systemically, yes, through people, through the place where I grew up, through the schools that I've experienced, the homogenized places where I was always otherized. It's a painful experience, in especially coming of age, and then loving my family as much as I did. So it was like all of us sort of having a similar experience, but the focus was on my father because he was part of some very severe discrimination, physical abuse and discrimination at his place of work that became a public case.
So this is so helpful. We never talk about mental health issues, ¿verdad?
Yeah,
No, de
drugs.
verdad, we didn't.
I'm shocked.
No, we didn't. I mean, I grew
Really?
up in Mexico.
No.
We were not supposed to feel anything. No, I mean, if there was a problem, you just had to face it on your own. Then I came to the United States as many immigrants, and then there was,
What about crying?
oh no.
Oh, no.
No?
Claro que no.
¿Qué?
No,
No, tú no lloras.
No
barely-
lloras, yeah.
No lloras.
I heard no lloras so much. Mira tu hermana y no llora. No llora, Jessica.
No,
Now
I
they
think
love it.
the
No,
idea
lloraban.
growing up was always that, we were always lucky, So no matter what,
Right.
keep going.
Right. You have no feelings.
If there was something bad happening around, like, you're lucky, keep going. When we did talk about drugs or sex, drugs was, don't do that.
So,
Is it harder to talk about drugs or sex? Or equal?
sex.
Sex, right? Yeah. I got my parents a drug. Sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can we finish with something
Yes,
positive? So
absolutely.
Please.
people
Yes.
watching us here, going through this anti-immigrant rhetoric everywhere, if they need help, what do they do?
As it relates,
Where would you start?
like substance use disorder, or like just as a human being? As a human being, what I related about Trump and hearing Trump's, opening messages to us, I was very triggered I was very triggered in a way that, I understood the feelings that I was feeling were historic, because the things that he said were literally what my bullies would say to me, like dirty Mexican and just all kinds of like disgusting things. And I experienced some pretty blunt force trauma in high school that stayed with me for my whole life. And it was always racialized and
More than bullying.
more than bullying. Yes, I was assaulted. I was raped in high school by multiple people, and I was blamed for that act. And the truth was hidden from me for 15 years, and I lived with that shame for so many years. And the first miracle of my sobriety was hearing from people who were eyewitnesses that night who could tell me the truth about what happened. And my God, that liberated me. But a lot of the reason why they were able to get away with what they did was because we were the poor, brown family, and we were up against families that were very wealthy, all white, and very powerful. But also that sexual assault and everything to do with it was very much still victim blamed, even in my own family. My mother's a survivor. I don't know a woman who hasn't experienced, has been touched by violence in that way. So it was my mom's mission in life that we never suffer that. And I just couldn't, I couldn't take that away from her. So I think that the most important thing, and I'm lucky, I felt like it was a curse at first, recovery, right? Or, the stigma of being an addict, of being an alcoholic, what that meant as a woman. My father always told me que lo más asqueroso que una mujer puede ser es borracha. That those stories aren't true, that I'm entitled to the facts, to my truth. So when I hear now the rhetoric and the continued rhetoric, and that is not just rhetoric anymore. It's painful as a story, but to see it in action, causing such chaos and violence, I think my first point of, protection is to remember that none of these stories are true. And that I'm a human being and I don't have to hide any aspect of myself to exist or to step into any room. I was applying for a fellowship last night and I wrote, I have experienced substance disorder, I actually celebrated 9 years, and I was going to erase it because I was like, does this take away my credibility? Does this make me unreliable? Is someone going to judge me for this? But I kept it because I know that informs my life and the way I move through it and what I want to give to my community so much. And so what I've done with my family and what I continue to do is just kind of, when I hear things, I step into that difficult work of continuing the conversation. I don't write people off as being ignorant or harmful or no one should be discarded in our families. And the more we learn to not abandon and discard ourselves for what might be difficult or what we may need to work on, we won't do it to our loved ones. And therefore we will hear things like, oh, they're going to just take criminals, and we'll think about it for 5 more minutes and understand, is that true? What can I do? How can I care about someone else? How can I understand the facts of this story so that I'm not complicit in any way that I can be, That's my mission now. I don't take on any of that shame, any of that stereotypes, and I don't delude myself into thinking that my good works or my graduate degree or my book publication is going to change the way that I'm perceived in Trump's America and through that lens. But that is not my lens. And that has nothing to do with reality or the people that I care about or myself. But the saddest part is that it doesn't save my family, I've lost 3 cousins in 5 years. They're very young. Kenny died of a drug overdose, a fentanyl overdose, last October in the middle of my, the publication of my book, in the middle of my book tour. And so I live with that guilt, I constantly struggle with why me, not them? But that guilt doesn't doesn't solve anything. It doesn't bring my cousins back. It doesn't. But I do want to talk about them, not them as drug addicts, but as people and as lives that could have been saved and deaths that could have been prevented if we could get over, these misguided stories about drugs and people who use them,
Jessica, gracias.
Thank
Thanks so
you
much
so
for sharing
much.
this.
Thank you.
Gracias, de verdad.
Thank you.
Truly.
This meant the world to me. Oh my God. Thank you.
The Moment is a production of Raambulante Studios in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura podcast network. Our staff includes Laura Rojas Aponte, Miguel Santiago Colón, and Lisa Cerda, with help from Paula Aleán, Diego Corso, Natalia Ramirez, and Elsa Liliana Ulloa. Samantha Suazo was our intern for this episode. The CEO of Raambulante Studios is Carolina Guerrero. Executive producers at iHeart are Arlene Santana and Leo Gomez. Pablo Cabrera, Dylan Unger, and Mark Canton also serve as producers. Sound design, final mix, and theme song by Elias Gonzalez. Our hosts are Jorge Ramos and Paula Ramos. If you like this episode, please share the word. Recommend The Moment to anyone who might enjoy unpacking these complicated times with us. If you like The Moment, pero también te gustan los podcasts en español, check out Raambulante Studios. Our shows, Raambulante, El Hilo, and Central, are really worth a listen. I'm Daniel Alarcón, EP of The Moment. Thanks for listening.